You're listening to Graphic Novel Explorers Club podcast, an audiobook club. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Graphic Novel Explorers Club. I'm one of your hosts, Francis Preziosi, and I'm joined by
Dennis Superchana
and
Johnny Flores.
We also have a special guest host today, the dad of Johnny Flores. Today we will be discussing Too Much Coffee Man by Shannon Wheeler. And we hope you've already read today's title because all four of us have read the book and we'll be discussing it. So beware, spoilers ahead. We would love for you to share your opinion and thoughts on our social media. Twitter is at GN Explorers Club on Facebook, or email us at gnexplorersclub@gmail.com. Graphic Novel Explorers Club is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are available. I'm really excited today because we are really stepping outside of the box. One, we have left our studio to record live at Oblivion Comics that serves great coffee here in Sacramento on K Street.
and toast
They do serve great toast.
and fantastic comics.
Yes. But even more excitingly, I think, is for the first time ever, Graphic Novel Explorers Club has 4 co-hosts today. We are joined by a very special co-host. Without him, actually, this podcast would never be.
In many ways,
Yes.
it wasn't with his inception.
So I'm proud to introduce today John Flores, the father of our podcast creator, Johnny Flores.
Good morning.
And then I'm also joined today with Johnny and Dennis.
Yo,
Hello.
We're just gonna dive right in.
I'm going to talk like this the whole time we're recording today, so you don't get me confused with my dad.
Oh, that's good because we were really worried. So I'm just gonna say first off to our listeners, this book is actually out of print. I dug deep in my saver to find this book.
And I was going to try and buy it because you guys always take so long to get me the book, and then I wind up not reading whatever we're supposed to read. That's it. And I tried to buy it. I tried to buy it, and it was out of print.
Yeah. So this is from the 90s. I think 90.
Right,
Oh, it
so
is definitely from the 90s.
it collects 8 issues. Much
No.
like
Well, okay. It collects 8 issues, but we'll get into that. It's actually only 6.
Yeah.
right. Well, 1 through 8, quote unquote,
Yes.
and it's actually printed over the period of I think 8 years. I forget.
Yeah, and in its heyday, it was highly regarded. It got rave reviews by Chicago Tribune, Washington Post.
Dennis is about to eat
Yeah.
Oblivion
Sorry.
toast.
Literally the brand Oblivion Toast. But anyway, so Shannon Wheeler, the author, had created this character. I think it started off in one of those independent rags, sort of like the local indie newspaper.
I remember seeing people, mostly skinny, hipster white guys, wearing the coffee man.
Right.
There were
much
hipsters in the 90s.
And it would always be like the faded shirt that was really baggy around the neck.
Okay.
They were called slackers at that time.
Oh, yeah, those
Yeah.
slackers back then.
And then he actually got a deal with Converse, and they released like a commercial back in the early '90s with starring Too Much Coffee Man.
Really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, you can see the.
He was there annoyed.
He was only on one shot,
Oh.
but it was kind of had a cult following. You can see the video on YouTube.
That actually makes sense. That's good to know going into this. So basically how this is, it's very short, easy read, even though it's quote-unquote 8 issues. This comic book goes back and forth between 2 stories. One is the creator of Too Much Coffee Man and how he is just kind of... reminds me of Johnny in some ways, but we'll get into that too. But it's just this man who has like a regular life, regular job, and on the side, he does this miniature comics. And he goes to like his local comic book store, to try to get them to sell them.
He collates them himself.
So, yeah, he
Via
prints them.
photocopier. Very
Yeah.
zine-like.
And throughout the course of the book, it's how he's becoming more and more successful. At the same time, it follows another character. I believe his name is Joel.
Yes.
Joel and his girlfriend and their relationship. And kind of his downfall, which we can get into. So, you doing okay over there still?
I am so far.
Okay.
Now-
following along.
Is this the first comic book you've ever read? Like maybe since you were a kid, or?
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's probably been over 40 years since I've read a comic book. And the last ones were probably like Archie's, and
Mad Magazine.
the Mad Magazine, and the then Superman, Batman kind of comics that were kind of like the cartoons that you see of them.
Well,
So
I'm sorry this is your reading.
quite a difference to what I last remember comics to be.
Well, and then also to add, Francis, the comic book also shows Too Much Coffee Man, so the actual comic strip itself. So you have the creator, Joel, and then it's interspersed with actual story of
Joel's not the creator. He's the loser.
Right, the creator and Joel.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah.
his friend Trixie, I think, right?
That's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
Trixie.
Yeah, so when it first starts off, you kind of don't even know what you're reading
Nope.
because it's this guy with this big coffee cup on his head, and he's like drinking too much coffee and the effects of the coffee, and he's going against this big corporation.
And he's bug-eyed from always drinking coffee, and he's kind of chubby, and he's wearing, it looks like a
The
onesie
bodysuit?
pajama.
Yeah.
He looks like, what's his name, the sidekick for the Tick?
Arthur
Arthur, yeah.
or Freakazoid.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's very 90s.
Yeah, and he goes up against this big corporate lawyer, and he wins. And then it shoots to this middle-aged guy in his underwear drawing a comic book. And it's the story he created, basically. And he goes to the comic book store, and he's like, hey, these are my mini comics. And the guy's like, yeah, they're doing great. You know, I have your money for you. He's like, you can get 18 cents, or you can get like
And
$3
store
for
credit.
store
Funny
credit.
what, yeah, how much he's making off of this, and he's stunned almost.
Yeah, he's happy that any of them sold.
Well, he's just
Yeah.
doing it for the joy of creating.
Then it cuts to Joel in a bar or a coffee shop because, hello, this is the 90s. I mean, coffee did kind of explode in the 90s. This is right before Starbucks was on every corner. Like, so I remember when Starbucks was a
Starbucks
new
actually
thing.
makes an appearance.
Yeah, Starbucks is in there, and I was kind of shocked because
Once again, I didn't even notice
probably
Well, like I said before, the comic starts being printed, I think, 93, and it concludes about 98, 99. By the time Starbucks appears, Starbucks is a thing. Because
Yeah,
Starbucks was
definitely.
being a thing at around 94, 96.
that. Yeah, and back then it was like you could get coffee, cappuccino, mocha, or white mocha.
When they introduced the
latte.
Frappuccino.
Yeah. Oh my God, we're so old. Not you, just us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Back
John
in
is
my day-
Benjamin Buttons.
Yeah.
He's actually younger than Johnny.
So, at the coffee shop, he's talking with his friend Trixie, who also works there. Because who didn't work at a coffee shop in the 90s? You either hung out at one or you worked at one.
He had
And,
the classic black bangs, too.
Yeah,
I remember
it's almost like Ghost World, but not as sophisticated.
Not sophisticated is the emphasis on that.
I was stationed in Camp Pendleton in 94, 95. And I remember we'd go to this coffee shop because I was one of the younger people in our little circle of friends. Most everyone was in their early 20s, and I was 19. And they'd all want to go there and drink coffee. And I just remember sitting there just like, what the hell are we doing here? This is so boring. This is just boring. You guys are just... This is so boring. I would just always be like, oh, God. Hey, you going to go to the coffee shop this weekend? I'm like, I guess. And then once I started surfing, I never went back because that's where I would
Well,
just hang out.
Friends, I mean, their whole central area was a coffee shop. So,
Oh, right, yeah.
So, 90s.
So Joel goes to Trixie. He has this girlfriend, but he really wants to break up with her, but he doesn't want to devastate her because, of course, girls are fragile and weak. And
Well, and he's kind of a chicken shit. too.
yeah,
You can see
Well,
that.
I think he makes himself out a little more than he is. It's basically his girlfriend's obsessed with him. His girlfriend's so in love with him.
That's what he's saying.
That's what
Right,
he's
yeah.
saying.
Right.
Yeah.
But then come to find out, the girlfriend's sleeping with someone else, but he doesn't know it yet.
And it was really funny the way they did that.
Yeah.
Because the friend Trixie tells Joel, you need to basically man up and just end things with her. It's going to be better for her and you
Yeah,
if you just...
getting advice from a woman that
Yeah.
if you do it like this, it'll be okay.
Yeah. And so he goes home and kind of weasels very... Like he's trying to break up with... He doesn't even say anything. She goes, are you trying to break up with me? And
She reads it.
Yeah, and then they seem to have like breakup sex, and then she goes home, gets into bed, turns the light on, and and there's a guy there already.
The roommate.
Yeah, and he's like, so how'd it go? And she's like, oh yeah, we broke up. I was like,
And he was like, finally.
yeah.
Honestly,
no. She says, I think he's gonna break up with me, which is interesting because like this. But wait, I want to go back because I think your dad said something really important. If our listeners were listening, I believe, John, what you said was when a woman gives you advice, you should listen to her and take it.
Well, in the 90s,
yeah,
maybe.
right.
Yeah.
In the context of the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting too. I've never cheated. I'm Catholic. It's not allowed. But this guy is okay with her cheating on her boyfriend. Like,
Well, see, to be honest, I was kind of thinking, I mean, this is 90s, so who knows? I was thinking they were in a polyamorous open relationship. So,
I don't think
Oh,
Joel
so
knew
90s.
about.
Right. Well, no, Joel didn't know.
oh, but this other couple,
The
like their
roommate.
boyfriend.
Yeah.
The roommate is what she says he is, right?
Right. Yeah.
And-
That's
I think
And
he
so
just didn't
it's
care.
I think it's a benefit
Yeah.
that comes with being the roomie.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
okay.
So then it cuts back. There's a lot of back and forth. It cuts back to the comic book guy. I don't know his name. It's just Coffee Man Creator.
It actually never
Never
really
We'll
says
just
it.
call him Shannon.
Yeah.
We'll just, for this.
Okay.
Which is funny because I thought that it was a woman who was writing this. I was like, why is she depicting herself as a Cro-Magnon man?
Guys
And
could
then
be named Shannon.
I just assumed it was a woman. And then it's funny because later in the comic, I'll just jump ahead, some fans go and knock on his door, and there's like, I think this is where she lives.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
they
right.
do. You're right. He's like, oh, I know her. So yeah, he's back in his house, his lowly little apartment, and he's just like having breakfast, and he goes to sit down to write. And this is where I start. Now I know why I liked this book. He goes to write. He doesn't have anything. He's kind of drawing a blank. The comic book store calls, and they're like, hey, like these are. Oh, he gets into the paper. That's what it was too. Now he's gotten into the paper, and people
Yeah,
are like,
through a
hey,
connection.
yeah, when's the next issue? And he's like, oh, I'm working on it right now. And then as he's talking, he's got this little knob, this little square in his head, and the square is getting bigger. And he sits down. He's still like is with the white paper. So I couldn't really figure out what the knob on the head was.
I didn't
Is that
understand
is that
either.
writer's block? Was
Yeah.
that?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what I was
That's what it
thinking.
was.
It's like, but because I could tell like
Real on the nose stuff.
right, like it was. So he reprints some more of his. Oh, go ahead. No,
I was
go,
gonna say,
I'll go back.
I want to paint a picture of the creator. He's like Cro-Magnon brow. He's also got big, bulgy eyes, almost like a flat head with very little forehead, big, crooked, uneven bottom teeth that stick up, that overlap each other, and
It's
as
like an Igor.
as the comic book progresses, he gets less and less vile looking. As he gets more successful, it's like he sees himself in a better light. He's still not handsome or anything, but he's less
Grotesque.
grotesque as the comic book progresses.
So he makes some more mini comics of his original series, and he goes to the comic book store, and he kind of hangs out because these kids are there talking about how much they love it, and yeah, they're like, oh, I know her, I know the writer, she's awesome, and he's like, is it kind of weird? He's like, is it weird that I'm like hanging out to see people talk about my books? He's like, kind of like.
Yeah, to the comic book store owner.
Yeah.
But
So-
it's also interesting, if I can interrupt, is how he goes to look for his, and it's in a sea of other books.
That's a good point. There is
And
that.
that,
Yeah.
but yet he's successful in his eye because these kids are talking about him.
Yeah.
That's a good
Well, doesn't he
observation.
talk about, and I think this speaks to just creatives in general, he talks about, like, what's the point? I mean, I'm just a pebble on the beach,
Yeah.
a drop in the ocean. How could I ever possibly make it? And it kind of speaks to him just kind of, this is the part I do like, is it's where he just kind of perseveres. He's not looking for fame. He's just looking to kind of do his thing, and he's soaking
first.
At first,
Yeah.
yeah. And then soaking in some of the fandom that he's seeing. And it's kind of pure in some ways.
Yeah, so then he goes back home, and some friends call and try to give him some ideas. He's like, whatever. And then, like, let's go to the movie. He's like, I can't. I've got to write. And this is where the comic book, you start to see, like, this becomes his life. This is all he does. And that's going to be important later on. But this is the best part, in my opinion, of the whole book. He creates this comic, the Cliché.
Yes.
Right.
Is this different from the puns? Because the puns were the best. Is
No,
Cliché
this is
guy?
a Cliché. They're
They
every
have a
line is
cliche battle.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. So it's all about Coffee Man, Cliché guy, and they're going back and forth.
Well, and another thing that's a cliche about the Cliché is you could tell it's 90s because he's got a lot of
Gear,
gear.
guns.
Like he's got a shiny metal arm, which
Oh, yeah.
became very popular in the 90s to have like metal infused into your body. He's got a Wolverine claw, a big giant.
machine gun.
Who's the guy with the
Cable?
Cable, like he's got a big gun like Cable has.
Muscles.
Bandolier.
pirate boots.
Yeah, the pirate fold over boots. So he's a cliche of all the 90s comics designs.
So they essentially have a duel.
Yeah, I'm going to read one part, can I?
Yeah.
Because this is great. So this is Cliché Man. And then,
I'm good actually.
Okay. No, I love
I
it.
just read that.
Is it? Let's cut this short. I'm in it for the long haul. I'm going to make short work of you. You've got a long road to hoe. And it just goes on and on like this. And
The long and short keeps
Yeah.
going back
Yeah.
and forth.
And then they go into food puns, and they
Yeah.
I
And
was
the bird.
Yeah, I was really it got a little long for me. I was like, oh god, come on. But I thought it was really like this is before the internet. Really, I'm like, how the hell did he
Come up with
come
all-
up with all of
Yeah.
these puns and cliches? Like that's impressive.
Yeah.
Although honestly, it was long, but I almost thought it was an Andy Kaufman kind of push it just that little bit more.
He does like to mess with his audience because we'll get to this, like what we were talking about, 6 and
7. Yeah.
7.
Right.
It's almost like the Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 and 3. There is
Right.
no Volume 2.
Right.
And that was just George Harrison's way of messing with his
The
audience.
whole thing is meta.
Yeah. So then it cuts back to Joel and his friend Trixie, and they're at the movies, and they're just kind of talking about life. And so they after the movie they go and get a drink, and he gets really, really drunk, and he tries to hook up with Trixie, and Trixie's like, "No, we're just friends."
You dummy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he goes to his to his girlfriend's house, right?
Right.
Because
And
he's telling Trixie how much he misses her.
And she
Right,
Trixie takes him home and is like, sleep on the couch. He's like, well, maybe we should hook up. She's like, no, this is never going to happen. Just sleep on the couch. So he has like a place to stay. And then he blows that.
Yeah, and then he it shows that he is goes to her house like in the middle of the night, starts banging on the door, and then goes back to
and vomits.
to Too Much Coffee Man. He writes another comic.
Right, and that should be also noted that she tossed out his comics, Joel's comics, which are Too Much Coffee Man. There's kind of a weird
Yeah.
Play on that
thread.
now.
Yeah.
And he winds up throwing up
On his
all
own
over
coffee
his-
book.
Yeah.
On his own
his
comic.
comic books and
Yeah.
on the door and himself.
Right.
So as we're going through this, I just realized I missed this whole section. I missed this whole comic, this other comic that he did. It looks interesting. Okay. So it's one of the Coffee Man comics. Like, oh no, wait, I did read this. Oh, I forgot though. I tried to block it out. Like, Too Much Coffee Man keeps dying over and
yeah.
over again,
And then comes
he's
back.
Yeah, that's what you were saying. Kind of went on for long.
Which, once again, it actually speaks, it's a meta kind of story because it speaks to the cliche of comic books at that time period where they would constantly kill the hero, bring him back in some miraculous way, and then kill him again.
So at this point, Shannon, he gets pretty popular and he goes on a radio show, not unlike us at NPR, nice plug. And he sits down with the DJ and starts interviewing him, and they're just throwing question after question at him, and they're not really waiting for him to respond. And they just keep saying, like, when's the next one coming
Yeah.
out? And he's like, so it just kind of stops there.
And he doesn't make a big deal of the fact that he's, getting this free press kind of I don't know. It seemed like to me like he's like there was maybe a time jump a little bit and,
Yeah.
and his success is picked up, but now we're several months after the
Right.
fact and he's starting to get some local fame.
Yeah, and then he meets with his friends for some coffee, some like other artists, and they kind of talk about the struggle and that his work has to be really sincere because if it's phony, you're going to lose all your readers.
And how I think he talked about this earlier. Maybe it's in this part where he's it's so time consuming. He doesn't really have. He's lonely because he commits to his work so much, and then
Right. His job, the comic is the benefit.
Yeah.
The work is the self-promotion. and the publicity.
Yeah, and he feels like the real work is all the publicity.
Right.
The fun part of it is the drawing. But he's also like he talks about his personal life too, how he's real lonely because of the work, but he likes the work so much that it's okay being lonely. Like he has that
One justifies the other,
Yeah.
but it keeps going back and forth.
Yeah.
And the truth is that I've talked to some artists, and that's really pretty much hits home.
Yeah, and I don't think it's this exact section. It's later on, but I think it's what Johnny was talking about too. Was he does a mathematical equation, the hours it takes him to draw a page and how many readers he needs per comic book to break even for
Yeah.
that time commitment.
Right.
And and you're right. It's
Well, especially for a comic book where you can blaze through it, in 30 minutes?
Yeah, that's what he talks about. He's like,
Right.
this is 15 hours per page, and they can read it in 20 minutes.
and then some kids can get together and do a podcast and just rip it to shreds.
Yeah. Or maybe you don't read the whole entire book.
Right, just
Right.
like whatever, I got bored. And I think too, this is where I started to really like this book, and I think I remembered why I liked it in the 90s. I think here we all have creative outlets. I know Johnny went to design school for a while. I write for a living, and
I sleep.
And my
But-
dad used to do photography quite a bit.
oh, did you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
That's why your Facebook photos are so good.
And now he's a drone master.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the U.S. Army. Oh, was I not
But-
supposed to say that?
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
But
It's the Skunk Works program at Lockheed.
Yeah, but it is really time consuming, and there were times, even like when I write professionally, I kind of struggle at work, and at 2 a.m. I will wake up and know what I want to write, and because I know it and it's in my head, like I would wake up at 2 a.m. and write until 5 a.m. and then there's times even now. I have a boyfriend, he has a kid, and there's times I'm like, I just need 2 hours. Like, I need to go lock myself up in a room, and I need to do this. And he's really sympathetic.
He's
but
probably thankful.
yeah, like, just get out of here. But
Don't you need 2 hours?
yeah,
Make it 3.
Take 3.
You know what? Just round up. Why don't you just go stay in a hotel for a week?
but it does become time consuming, and
Right.
there are things that you start to put to the side. Showering is one of those things sometimes.
Sanity.
Looks like,
Yes,
yeah.
I can vouch for that.
Well, it's another thing. Like, you do get so into your world and what you're trying to create, you kind of lose track, I think. Oh, well, Dennis, you created children. So did John. So that's
Yeah.
something.
That's an
I don't.
ongoing project.
I mean, we'll see how they turn out.
Yeah, we'll see.
John said, "Okay, you're to be determined."
I guess to the future timeline, you're welcome or I'm sorry.
Christy's the reason why they're going to turn out
That's
okay.
true. Yeah, that's a good one. So it goes back to Joel. He throws up at the girlfriend's house, and that's basically it.
Well,
The cops pick him up.
they're
Oh,
upstairs.
okay. Yeah.
The ex-girlfriend and her dude are upstairs and like, you think he's done? And then she's like, yeah. He goes, maybe we should just call the cops. And she's like, all right. So yeah, they call the cops on him, which the police
Right.
just
in the first part of that story.
yeah.
They
And
had
then
determined that. And then it skips a little bit.
yeah, the police pick him up and they just take him back. He's recounting
How it led up to that.
Trixie. Yeah, how the police just pick him up and they just take him home because there's just like no point to take this drunk dumbass home
Right.
to jail. So there's kind of no consequences for him.
Yeah, that's. So how far into the book did you get?
Just past that.
Oh, okay. And
I read the whole thing
Yeah.
for once.
As did I.
Oh.
so at this point, was it just not riveting anymore to you, or were
Ran
you
out of
just,
time.
No, I
yeah.
ran out of time.
ran out of time. Okay.
Yeah. When Johnny said, here's the book. I said, I didn't think there was going to be enough time. I said, where's the dust jacket so I can just.
Oh yeah. That's. Yeah. So then it goes back to Shannon he goes on a date.
Which, honestly, I kind of got mixed up.
Yeah.
She looks like
He
the
did?
girlfriend of Joel.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. He
How did
goes
I
out to
miss
dinner.
this?
Yeah, I will say this is very easy because there is no distinction between the artwork, the pages. It's easy to kind of
Yeah.
It's very monotone, so that's why I said I missed that one section. But yeah, he goes on a date, and it's literally one page. That's how you missed it.
Yeah.
And they try to have an in-depth conversation, but it's not going the way he wants. He's like, well, let's just go shopping. He just does what he thinks the girl wants to do.
Oh, I thought that was just like a friend of his. I didn't realize that was a date. Oh, see, I completely missed that.
I thought it was a date. Maybe it wasn't.
I thought it was a date.
I think he thought it was a date, or he's
Right.
trying to
Oh,
date.
right.
Maybe she was just like, "You're in the friend zone."
No, I think this was his attempt at trying to have a social life outside of the comic book.
Yeah, and it didn't go over too well. So it just goes back to Joel talking to Trixie about how he got arrested, and did they break up yet? I don't know.
Yeah,
There's just a
I
lot
think
of
they're
in-depth
broken up
talk.
at this point.
Yeah. Oh, and this is when he starts talking about he wants to shave his head.
Is that where she
Oh
talks?
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Where
Dennis.
she wants to maybe do a screenplay? Is this?
She's talking about
Yeah,
how she wants
it
to
is.
Yeah.
start writing movies, and he kind of is like, no, the real work is in comic books. And
right.
She's like, no, writing is the real.
Well, and then she
That's
actually
as far as I got.
she
Just
actually
right
makes a
before that.
really good point because with the comic book you actually have to craft something pretty good, right? But with the screenplay, she basically said you can sell an idea and they'll just rewrite it.
Yeah.
But you still get the money essentially for selling the idea.
She looks like the Emily character from that Emily Has a Whatever.
Emily the Strange.
Yeah,
Mhm.
where she's wearing the black shoes and always has a cat with her.
Right.
That's yeah. And Joel realizes why he got arrested. He's still in love with his girlfriend, and that's why I was like, "Why did you break up?" Like, I don't ever get his plight. I don't get Joel's plight at all. He's just like some.
Well, he's the same. He's the typical Gen Xer at that time, where it's like, I don't want to be in a relationship. I don't want to be
He wants
tied
the
down.
best of both worlds.
Right. But
They-
then again, when it's gone, it's like, oh well, shoot, I don't have anyone to love me.
Shannon said, the creator guy character says at one point in the book, he's like, well, he's talking with his artist friends and says, well, I want my cake. I want to be able to eat it too. I
Right.
want this. And so I think maybe Joel's like an extension of
Right.
that desire to have everything.
They're
And-
two different paths, right? Two different forks of the same path.
Yeah. So then it goes back to the coffee man on his date with the girl at the funeral, and then it goes back to Joel. Because we were talking about this part about how the coffee man keeps dying
Right.
in the comic.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Joel's like reading the comic book. Oh, he's reading. Okay.
He's reading too much Coffee Man.
Yeah, he's reading too much Coffee Man, and then he says, "I don't get it. There's no punchline. There's nothing." And he's like, "There's nothing. That's funny, I guess."
Well, it's funny.
Because that's how the previous page before, it's Too Much Coffee Man is doing something, and then all of a sudden it just ends, and you're like,
Right.
oh, okay, turn the page to see what the ending is, and you cut to Joel saying, well, that's it?
Yeah.
That's it? Like, it just ends? So, I don't know, I thought that was kind of clever.
Honestly, I think this speaks to a lot of things today, whether it's a YouTube video or a podcast or comic, where someone becomes successful by accident. They just kind of hit that niche, and then they just blow up. Then someone reads that and goes, I can do that too, and I can do it better, and I know better. And Joel is that person where he thinks, I can make a comic book on my own, and I'm going to devote all my energy to it, and I'm going to make it better than Too Much Coffee Man. And, well, we'll see what happens.
So Joel goes and shaves his head, and then it cuts back to...
And the friend Trixie says, don't shave your head. Like,
Yeah,
don't do this.
Yeah. And that's like a classic girl move, actually, when you break up, to change your hair.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, and even when I got divorced, I read all the advice columns, and they say don't do anything for the first 6 months, because a lot of women will chop their hair or go blonde. But I did. I got bangs. It was
right,
like
I
a
remember
big.
that.
I got bangs. I was like, ooh, look at me, like.
Well, I'm screwed if I ever change any relationship.
Yeah, you have to
Shave your
grow
eyebrows.
some hair. So then it cuts to the scene where these kids find Shannon, the coffee book man creator, and they go to his house, and
That's where the one kid says, oh, I know where she lives.
she lives.
You're right.
Yeah. And they keep asking about when's the next book? When's the next book? So he finally kind of kicks the kids out.
But they're asking for stuff. They want...
A T-shirt.
He seems a little... the way I read it was he seems a little flattered, but at the same time annoyed that they because they kind of rag him a little bit. They're like, oh, your comic books are worth so much now. Do you have any first editions? He's like, no, I sold all of them. They're like, oh, you dummy. You should have kept them because they're worth
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars now. And I felt like they were just kids being kids, where they say things and they don't
Right.
realize it could be hurtful. And then at the same time that these children are pointing out to him, well, you're not making any money off of this stuff. Like, you should be making money off of this
Right.
stuff. can we get a free T-shirt? Like they
Yeah,
start
they're
asking
asking
for
for things.
free things. He's like, well,
Yeah.
I think I've got some stuff laying around.
And I think maybe we skip this because at this point too, at some point, like one of his characters gets in a commercial or something, and people like are asking him, like, "Aren't you making money off this?" He's like, "No." Like, so I think maybe there's some infringement, maybe that
he
happened.
didn't seem to be aware that the character was being used.
Right, like it took off so big. So so this is a good part too. So when the kids leave, they're like, "Oh, look what I swiped! It's his lighter." And the guy's talking to the guy's like on a call with another friend, and he's like, "Nobody believes in work. People want to be lottery winners. No work for lots of money. They want to believe that success is based on something cheap, like selling out, exploiting others, a deal with Satan, or rich parents." And okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And I do think there is some level of that. When people see someone's success, they don't see the hard work that went into
Exactly.
it. They don't. People are like, "Oh wow, like it's so easy. You just create this character, you're gonna get a bunch of money."
Or you're an overnight success, then realize it probably took a decade of work.
I've heard a
Right.
couple of those guys on some of those programs. I like to follow the car building stuff, and they'll say, "Oh, the overnight success," like that Jesse James, and he says, "What you don't realize is I've been doing this since I was a kid."
Yeah, that's well. Even the comic book we read recently, My Favorite Things is Monsters. She's in her 40s or
Yeah.
She's older than
40s.
that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, in her 50s, and she's been drawing for years. And this was her first book, which was amazing. But
Right.
all of that went into it. Yeah, people don't see that. People don't see the isolation, the struggle, trying to create a story. So, okay, I want to talk about this because this is one of my other favorite parts. And there's not a lot to like about this book. But so it goes to issue 6 and 7. He basically goes on a tirade and says, "This is what I wanted the story arc to be. I wanted the illustrator of Too Much Coffee Man to get more and more successful, and Joel to get further and further down the chain. Like, I want to his demise." He's like, "But honestly, I'm tired of writing it. Like, I don't want to have to write 6 and 7. I'm not excited about 6 and 7. So I'm
and there
just
was a
going
year
to cut.
break.
Yeah, I'm just going to cut to the end, to the
Well,
part
right.
that I want to write."
He talks about too. He's like, when you're making a joke, or when a comedian's telling a joke, there's the build up and then
The punchline.
the punchline. He goes, I didn't want to do the build up. I just wanted to do the punchline. So and he had taken
And it's my comic.
several months off. Yeah, and he talks about how you got to follow the rules. He goes, well, wait,
Yeah.
like what Dennis just said, that no, I'm the one who made the rules for this book. I can do whatever the hell I want. So then that's when he writes that little thing saying, so I just skipped ahead.
Right. Basically, and then, funny enough, he references those missing issues that
Yeah.
never existed in the other comic, the later issue. Usually, in the past, comics would go see issue blah 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 in reference to get more information about something. And so he, in the next issue, says see issue 6,
Yeah,
see
and
issue
issue
7,
Which
when
don't
they don't
exist.
exist. And he did it to basically screw with readers, so they
Yeah.
would be looking for it and asking about it.
I'm curious if for the trade paperback, if the publisher said you've got to write something, because otherwise people are going to be like, well, did I miss this? You know?
like to get it published.
Yeah, I don't think that was his intention to let you in, because you're revealing the joke, and and that's for him to laugh and know that.
Right.
So then it goes to Too Much Coffee Man's last comic, and basically he sees a crime. He's gonna save the day. This man is stealing money from this woman, and he's gonna get the man. But the man's like, "Wait, this woman, she has a ton of money." He's like, "I have no money. I have kids to feed."
He pummels the shit out of the guy too.
Yeah, he
Right.
does. And so this really puts Mr. Coffee Man, or Too Much Coffee Man, in a dilemma. Like, what is the right thing to do? Even though he's stealing for a greater cause. So he goes on this mission, and he starts saving the world.
He becomes
literally,
omnipotent.
yeah, thank you. Yes.
Galactus.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, he's got the Galactus
Right,
eyeball.
right. He does the whole
flames.
Kirby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jack Kirby eyeballs.
So throughout the book, he just destroys everything. He destroys the world, and he's like, "Oh, I've destroyed everything. It's all gone." That was fun.
But
Yeah.
the whole part of that though is he talks about how we don't take care of our folks. Poor people suffer, and the few get to benefit off of that suffering. And that's when he'll do one thing, and then he has to correct that action because he realizes the folly in it, and then it just gets so out of hand. Then he just destroys everything. He literally tears reality apart,
Right.
and is just on a blank white page.
Yeah. And I think that's still true. I think we still don't care about people. Which is very true with all the hurricane relief.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of things that he talks about in this book about the through Too Much Coffee Man and the character of the
Joel.
creator, Shannon,
Okay.
about problems that still resonate today about
For sure.
corporate greed,
Mhm.
'cause-
society not taking care of itself.
Right.
There's a lot of issues that he brings up in this book. That's why I was really surprised. I went in. I didn't really know too much about. I thought it was going to be more like a Calvin and Hobbes kind of
Right.
thing, where you just or what's that, Red Meat?
Right.
I thought it was going to be like that, where it was just going to be a bunch of strips
Right.
that you read.
That's what I
they
thought, too.
compiled, and then it got into this more in-depth story. So we'll get to my
Yeah.
opinion on that, just like we'll get to your
So
guys's.
it cuts forward to Joel 9 years later. You can look at issue 7 for that backstory. And he's basically homeless. He's just like on the street. He talks about like striking out literally when he was a kid.
Yeah, because it's like kids just getting together to play baseball, and the bases are loaded. There's 2 outs, and he thinks, I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to be the hero of the story. And he fouls a ball that
Right.
counts as a strike. He strikes out on the second one, and then it's just an immediate cut to, well, like, I failed, and then it transitions to him being like this homeless guy.
Yeah, and he even says like, I'm not going to try again because I got laughed at.
Yeah,
Right, but he really believed in himself. So it wasn't like, oh man, I'm really nervous. He actually like stereotypically like, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit the ball and it's gonna go out and it's gonna be a home run. And yeah, he didn't.
Yeah. So Trixie ends up seeing him, and she has like long hair now, but she still has her bangs. And they kind of chat for a minute. And
She's hesitant to even acknowledge him.
yeah, she's like, wait, is that who I think it is? He
And
looks
it-
terrible.
yeah.
He's like summed up against the wall. But they do start talking, and he's like, she's like, oh, he's like, we should get together sometime. Things are going great for me. And she's like, that's great. I gotta go. Like,
Right.
And he delusionally is like, oh, she probably wanted me to ask her out.
right.
yeah. Oh, yeah, he tries to ask her out for a beer. And she's like, maybe some other time. And he's like, I didn't even have money for a beer, like to himself.
Yeah, but he
Yeah.
thinks in his head like, oh, she probably wants him to get into a relationship with me. He's delusional.
Yeah. And then he kind of talks about how, like, in his 20s, it was cool to be fashionably poor. And it was kind of like, that was the thing, like, when you're a
Still
hipster,
is.
yeah, you just shunned corporate everything.
Right.
But he said, what I didn't realize is my friends all had backups. They had trust funds. They had elderly parents who were going to die. He's like, it was okay for them to be fashionably poor.
And some of them had the inclination to go get master's degrees.
Oh, right,
Like,
yeah.
Right.
some of them were like, I'm gonna go to school.
Right.
you
And
know.
so basically what he's saying too, though, is like they grew up and he didn't.
Right.
Like he
Correct.
was, and you do see that with some people. They just kind of get stuck in this mentality. So then this is really good too. It flashes back to the creator, Shannon, and he's thinking to himself, like, when do I become successful? And this is so true for all artists. Like, I don't think any person is like, oh, I just created something fabulous. I think you always question what you drew, what you
Right.
wrote. It could be better, and like.
And to point out, he's very successful. He's like in a suit at this point, right?
Yeah, he's,
Yeah,
in a
he's
suit,
on a
like
plane.
a plane,
He-
and
nice hair.
yeah, and he's like, "Am I gonna be plagued with self-doubt my whole life?"
But he flips back and forth. He's having this internal argument of well, why don't I feel successful? My comic books are published all over the world. I've got this money coming in. They're optioning to make a cartoon out of my character. So he's like, and there was a time when I was content just to have fans acknowledge my work.
Right.
So, it's a valid argument that he's having
and then
with himself.
He ends up running into a friend at a bar who's also another writer, and they get into a discussion. And it
Another
comes,
cartoonist. Right?
yeah, and the cartoonist is like, "Yeah, I got this offer to sell my character for a lot of money." And the guy's like, "Well, I want to ask how much." He's like, "Well, $1 million." He's like, "What? How could you not take it?"
Right.
And his friend's like, "Well, because they own everything."
They wanted the rights to all of it.
Yeah, and he's like, "How could you still not be tempted?" And his other guy is like, I kind of lost respect for you now, like, because back in the day when he was creating, that's all he wanted was just to own his character and just do these things. And now he's more about the money.
Right.
That's how I took it, the transition.
Well, and it bookends the fight between Too Much Coffee Man and then this corporation that said they're too much. It's Too Much Coffee Man, but with the C replaced by a
Copyright Man.
Copyright.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
Too much copyright, man.
Yeah.
So it ends. This is great. It ends. They're leaving the bar, and this guy who happens to be Joel, this homeless man, in a Too Much Coffee Man shirt, ask, hey, you got spare change? And they're like, no. So, thoughts?
Well, here's the thing. I both hated the book and loved it at the same time. I felt it actually, in terms of the struggle that an artist has and two different possible paths an artist can take, kind of resonated. I feel like some of the things that happened to the creator and his perspective on success and everything actually was pretty good. The artwork was kind of weird in 90s, but I don't know. It's hard for me to judge just because some of this stuff really resonated with me, but at the same time, it was just off the wall bonkers. Too Much Coffee Man was just so liquid MTV.
Yeah.
Spike and Mike's animation film.
The Maxxx.
Yeah, the Maxxx. It was just so extreme, but maybe that was the joke because the whole thing is so meta, right? I mean, it's just Too Much Coffee Man is speaking to the stereotypes and cliches of comic books. The creator is that person trying to find success. So I don't know. In many ways, I feel like it succeeded at its mission.
I agree with you. I'll jump in and then I'll let the gentleman have the last word, father and son. For once, I'll let you have the last word. So I'm gonna be totally brutally honest. This was a rush for me. I wanted to read Barry Ween, Boy Genius. And I got the comic book, and I was getting ready to read it, like Sunday night. And I was like, oh, no, this is only 1 through 3, and there's 8 volumes. So I was like, oh, okay, we're not going to have time to read this by the time we record. So I was kind of going through, and I pulled this out from my saver when I had moved recently. And I was like, well, let me just start reading this. And I was 15 minutes in, and I was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, I got to commit. I'm just going to read it. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, this is pretty terrible. But then I was like, okay, why would 20-year-old Francis like this book? And as I'm reading it, and yeah, the cliches and everything, I was like, oh, it's kind of funny. And then that's when I got why I like this still. This is not your typical comic book, with, like, as John had mentioned, with the superheroes and the good guy, the bad guy. And I did like the internal struggle of the artist. I did see some of Johnny in this, as I had mentioned.
For sure.
Because I feel like you've worked really hard to kind of build up what you're passionate about. And believe me, Johnny is not doing it for the money, okay? Like, none of us are. Like, this is just, Johnny's just someone who's very passionate about what he does. He loves it, and he tries to help other people to do it because he likes it so much. And I think that's an internal struggle also as an adult. Maybe John can speak to this more. I don't know if at any point you do feel like, oh, I'm finally successful. I've reached the pinnacle of success. Or, oh, I'm an adult now. Like, I'm finally able to handle things, you know? Like, I still question myself every day. I could see why 20-year-old Francis liked this, because it probably was, like, at the time, like, the anti-corporation, just about the art. And when you're 19 and 20, that's all you care about is the art. You don't care about the IRA.
You were reading this and listening to letters from Cleo.
Yeah. No. So my favorite movie back then was Reality Bites.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and
what's the one inside the music shop?
Empire
Records.
I have the soundtrack and I still listen to it.
Of course, everybody did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it had the gin blossoms on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was nice to revisit it. Oh, and this is another reason why I really, really like this book. We have been reading such volatile stuff lately with Preacher and Luther Strauss, and even my favorite things is Monsters.
Right.
There's no sexual abuse in this book. There's no violence. There's no blood and guts.
Yeah.
It's just
Well,
like a.
There is a couple of people get squished and a dog gets
That's
hammered into pulp on accident. But
You
it's
see
not
the
like,
girlfriend in bed with her
Yeah.
other boyfriend.
And the artwork is, oh, sorry, that was loud. The artwork is very juvenile, but again, I have a lot of applause to the writer because he did it. He was able to create something,
Yeah.
and he did it his way. It's not a corporate book, but that's how I felt about it. I liked it. It was just an easy read. It's kind of bad, but I liked it.
And let me just, before they jump in, also emphasize that this book still has success. You can still buy other collection. I don't know if this is part of the other collections, but there's collections you can find on Amazon that may include this. And if you look at the Wikipedia page, I mean, there's even been an opera based upon this.
Oh, really?
wow.
And a concept album that someone did.
Oh, wow.
So this has a cult audience.
What about you, Pop?
So for me, like that being a long period of time between comics, I know how much they've changed over the years. Just looking at what I hear kids talking about in that, and for me, the graphics I think are very interesting because I like graffiti style of art, and that's what this reminds me of. That style.
Street.
So I enjoyed that, but the story was hard to follow and really understand how it leaps from
It was
each
very
of the
manic.
each of the different things, the change. But it was interesting for me to go back to reading something like this because I like to read. I do like to read. I'd like to read, and the subjects that I read about are all over the place, and so it was interesting to come back to something like this. That's not what I would normally read. So thanks for having me do a piece of that.
Absolutely.
I started off not liking it, and then towards the end of it, I really liked it a lot. The story side of it, the illustrations are a little. It's like when you're a kid and your art talent is developing, and you start to learn things that maybe you weren't shown. You just innately pick it up, like perspective, and he does the crossed over teeth so much, and it just made me think of, when I was 10 and I learned how to layer block letters. So, you would do everything in capitals and you'd spell your name out in capital letters, but they'd be the J, and then for like me, J, O was behind it, the H was behind the O, the N was behind the H, and that's it. A lot of the book reminded me of that as like when I was a young artist or illustrator, when skills were developing. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. If all this stuff I learned independently, and I finally put it together in one thing, that's probably how it would have looked, like cross hatching and heavy use of like black ink everywhere. But the story side of it, I really enjoyed. It came out of the biographical aspect of the story is what really stuck out to me. I was like, oh, he put a lot of work into thoughts that were in his head, and things that he wanted to say about society and his life and the struggles of an artist. So I really enjoyed it. I was shocked. I started it off. I was like,
Did you guys hate me at
is
first?
this another
I did.
damn Brian Michael Bendis experience here?
Yeah, no,
Fire, and what was the other one? Fish or what?
Jinx.
Fire.
Jinx.
Yeah,
Fire
Jinx,
and
yeah.
When it opened with Too Much Coffee Man versus Too Much Copyright Man, I was like, this is so 90s and
Yeah.
terrible. But like Johnny said, there was a much deeper layer that I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I can't wait to find this 20 years from now and see what I think then. Want to thank our listeners so much for tuning in today, and we want to give a special thanks again to Oblivion Coffee and Comics for having us at their shop, and to Mr. Flores, who drove all the way from the Grapevine to be on our
From
show today.
La Morada. He came up just for this episode.
All right. Then we're going to kick him out.
I gotta go.
You can find me, Francis, on Instagram at Words and Waffles. Dennis?
You can follow our accounts on Twitter and Instagram at GN Explorers Club, and you can also email us at gnexplorersclub@gmail.com.
And this is Johnny. You can follow me on Twitter at Serious Talk Twit, and I don't know what my Instagram is.
And this is John, and you can find me at the local motorcycle shop.
Yep.
That's true. Thank you so much. And
Quick story. My dad and his girlfriend and their friends went to Jamaica a couple weeks ago, and while he was there, this is how much my dad loves bikes. He wanted to find he wanted to go to a bike shop, and the only thing there was the Harley shop. So he went and visited the Harley shop in Jamaica so he could get a T-shirt.
Nice. That's very cool.
You have a very loving girlfriend.
I do.
Yeah, she's great.
I'm blessed.
She was great.
Well, thank you guys so much, and we hope you tune back in next week for another great episode of Graphic Novel Explorers Club.
They'll decide if it's great.
I will tell them.
Bye.
And bye-bye now.
Thank you again to Oblivion Comic Books for having us to discuss Too Much Coffee Man. Please join us next week as we discuss March by John Lewis. Oh, shit.
Okay.